Your spiritual awakening rarely begins with clarity. It doesn't start with peace, light, or sudden understanding. It begins quietly, inside the body, a tension that won't go away, a pressure in your chest that feels emotional, not physical, a strange fatigue, even when your life looks fine on the outside. You may wake up at night with your heart racing, unable to explain why, or feel a tightness in your shoulders, as if you're carrying something invisible. Sometimes your body hurts, and there's no clear reason for it. At some point, you start asking the wrong question. Not what's wrong with my body, but why is my body speaking now? Carl Jung believed that the unconscious doesn't wait for permission. When something inside you has been ignored for too long, it finds another way to be heard. And very often, that way is physical, a constant tightness, a dull ache that moves from one place to another, a sense of heaviness that doesn't match your daily life. Nothing dramatic enough to call an emergency, nothing clear enough to name, but persistent. Here's what most people don't realize. The body doesn't create symptoms randomly. It responds to inattention, especially when your conscious identity no longer matches who you're becoming, when emotions are suppressed, when desires are postponed, when truths are avoided. The psyche looks for another outlet, and the body becomes the stage. This is why pain often appears after you start changing, after you begin questioning your old roles, after you stop numbing yourself the way you used to. The ego tries to hold the structure together. The unconscious pushes for movement. That friction doesn't stay invisible. Jung warned that what remains unconscious does not disappear. It relocates. And when it relocates, it often settles into muscles, breath, posture, and energy levels. This doesn't mean every symptom is symbolic. And it doesn't mean the body should be ignored medically. But it does mean that sometimes, treating the body alone is not enough. Because the pain isn't asking to be silenced. It's asking to be understood. And here's the uncomfortable part. If the message is misunderstood or dismissed, the body doesn't stop speaking. It simplifies the language. What begins as tension becomes fatigue. What begins as fatigue becomes pain. And only then do most people start listening. There is a moment in every awakening that feels strangely unsettling. Not dramatic, not obvious, just uncomfortable. You begin to sense that something inside you is shifting, but the outer structure of your life hasn't caught up yet. So the body carries the tension. You may feel it as restlessness, as pressure, as a quiet discomfort that follows you through the day. Nothing screams for attention, and yet, nothing fully relaxes. This is not the body malfunctioning. This is the body responding to resistance. Because awakening doesn't arrive gently. It challenges the image you've been maintaining, the roles you learned to play, the identity that once kept you safe, the version of yourself that knew how to survive. That structure, the ego, doesn't disappear easily. It tightens. It holds. It resists. And while the mind tries to rationalize what's happening, the body absorbs the pressure. Breathing becomes shallow. Muscles stay tense longer than necessary. Sleep feels lighter, more fragmented. You're tired, but not in a way that rest fully fixes. This is the friction most people never associate with awakening. Because awakening isn't just expansion. It's confrontation. A quiet confrontation between who you've been and who you're becoming. Carl Jung described this as the tension between the ego and the self, the conscious identity and the deeper center of the psyche. When these two move out of alignment, the conflict doesn't remain psychological. It becomes somatic. The body becomes the mediator. It holds what the ego refuses to face. It expresses what words have not yet formed. That's why symptoms often appear when you start questioning your life. When old goals lose meaning. When relationships feel misaligned. When the future you were chasing suddenly feels empty. The ego wants certainty. The unconscious wants truth, and the body stands in between, trying to contain both. This is why awakening can feel like losing control, not because something is wrong, but because something false is dissolving. And here's the part few people talk about. The ego often interprets this discomfort as danger. It tries to regain control by tightening routines, suppressing emotions, or forcing positivity. But the body doesn't respond to force. It responds to honesty. The more the inner conflict is denied, the louder the physical signals become. What starts as subtle unease becomes persistent fatigue. What begins as tension turns into pain, not as punishment, but as insistence. Jung believed that the psyche seeks balance above all else, and when balance is delayed consciously, it is enforced unconsciously, through the body. This is why awakening feels destabilizing before it feels liberating. Why discomfort often precedes clarity. Why the body reacts before the mind understands. Because transformation doesn't ask the ego for permission. It simply begins, and the body makes sure you notice. At some point, something shifts. Not outside, inside. You stop trying to push the discomfort away, and you start noticing it. The way your body reacts before your mind does. The signals you used to ignore. The sensations you brushed off as stress or coincidence. Now, they feel intentional, not alarming, but persistent. And this is where many people get confused. Because once you notice the pattern, you can't unsee it. The body begins to repeat itself. The same tension, the same fatigue, the same subtle signals, returning at specific moments. Not randomly, but in response to something within you. This is the threshold most people stand on without realizing it. The moment when awareness shifts from what's happening to me to what is my body responding to. And from here, the experience becomes clearer. Because the body doesn't speak in abstractions. It speaks in sensations. And once you understand how to listen, the signs become easier to recognize. Some are subtle, some are intense, but none of them are meaningless. Sometimes it begins as something so small you almost dismiss it. A faint ringing, a thin high tone in the background, a soft buzzing that appears in the quiet, and then disappears the moment you try to catch it. At first, it feels random, but this is where most people miss the point. Because what makes this sensation unsettling isn't the sound itself. It's what it does to your attention. It pulls you inward. It interrupts the normal noise of your day and forces a pause, even if only for a second. And if you've felt this, you're not imagining it. Many people report these moments of ringing during periods of inner change. After an emotional release, during stillness, late at night when the world finally quiets down, or right when the mind is about to drift into sleep. Not because the body is trying to scare you, but because something inside you is recalibrating. Jung didn't speak in the language of downloads or vibrations, but he did speak about the psyche's ability to disturb ordinary perception, when the unconscious is moving closer to the surface. And that's the key. Sometimes awakening doesn't arrive as a thought. It arrives as a shift in perception, a subtle rewriting of what your nervous system notices, and what it can no longer ignore. The ego wants the familiar. The unconscious brings what's unfamiliar, not to harm you, but to widen the frame. So the ringing becomes a threshold, a reminder that your inner world is becoming louder than your outer distractions. And here's the uncomfortable part. If you treat it as nothing, but it keeps returning, it may be because the body is marking moments you haven't fully recognized yet. Moments where you were close to a truth, close to a realization, close to a feeling you usually outrun. This is why the sensation often appears in stillness. Stillness is where the unconscious has room to speak, and the body finds a way to make you listen. Not with a dramatic sign, not with a revelation, with a whisper that repeats. Because the message is rarely delivered once. It's delivered until it's received. And as we move to the next symptom, you'll notice something important. The body doesn't just change one signal. It often shifts the entire system. At some point, tiredness stops making sense. You sleep, you rest, you slow down, and still, the exhaustion lingers. Not the kind that comes from doing too much, but the kind that feels deeper, heavier, as if your body is carrying something that sleep alone can't release. This is where many people start blaming themselves. Maybe I'm lazy. Maybe I'm burned out. Maybe something is wrong with me. But what makes this fatigue different isn't how tired you feel. It's where the tiredness comes from. Because this exhaustion doesn't begin in the muscles. It begins beneath awareness. And if you've experienced it, you're not alone. Many people notice this kind of fatigue during periods of inner reorganization. When old motivations no longer work. When familiar goals lose their pull. When the future they were chasing suddenly feels distant or hollow. The body senses the shift before the mind can name it. And it slows you down. Not as punishment, but as protection. Carl Jung understood this as a drain of psychic energy. When large amounts of inner effort are spent maintaining an outdated identity, very little energy remains for vitality. The ego works hard to preserve what feels familiar. The unconscious works just as hard to dismantle what no longer fits. And the body absorbs the cost. So fatigue becomes a signal, a quiet instruction to stop pushing forward, with structures that are already dissolving. This is why rest doesn't fully restore you. Because what's being asked isn't sleep. It's adjustment. An adjustment of direction, of priorities, of internal alignment. Here's what most people don't realize. This kind of exhaustion often appears right before a psychological shift, before clarity, before reorientation, before something finally gives way. The body pulls energy inward, away from performance, away from momentum, away from old patterns. It forces stillness when the mind would rather rush. And if this fatigue is ignored, if it's overridden with constant distraction or pressure, the signal doesn't disappear. It deepens. What begins as tiredness can turn into numbness, or heaviness, or a loss of interest in things that once defined you. Not because you're losing yourself, but because something false is being released. The body knows when it's time to conserve energy. For a transformation the mind hasn't fully accepted yet. And this is why awakening often feels less like rising, and more like slowing down, less like expansion, and more like recalibration. As we move forward, another pattern begins to emerge. Because when the body can't slow you down through fatigue alone, it often speaks through tension. And that message is harder to ignore. There's a moment when the body stops whispering and begins to press, a tightness in the chest, a weight that feels emotional, not physical, a sensation that rises without warning, sometimes subtle, sometimes overwhelming, not sharp enough to be panic, not clear enough to explain, just present. This is where many people become afraid, because the chest is where emotion gathers. And when emotion has nowhere to go, the body holds it there. If you've felt this, you may have noticed something else. It doesn't appear randomly. It shows up during moments of honesty, when you're alone with your thoughts, when a conversation touches something sensitive, when you pause long enough to feel what you usually avoid. And this is the detail most people miss. The chest tightens not because something is wrong, but because something is being contained. Emotion that wasn't expressed, truth that wasn't spoken, grief that was postponed, desire that was dismissed. The ego prefers composure. The unconscious demands sincerity. And the body stands between them. Carl Jung understood this as emotional pressure created by repression. Not repression in a dramatic sense, but the everyday kind. The quiet decisions to stay silent, to be reasonable, to not disrupt, to not feel too much. Over time, that pressure accumulates, and the body finds a place to store it. The chest becomes a holding chamber. This is why the sensation often feels like more than anxiety, and less than pain, because it's neither. It's containment. And here's the part that unsettles most people. This tightness doesn't ease through distraction. It doesn't dissolve by thinking differently, and it rarely responds to force, because it's not asking to be calmed. It's asking to be acknowledged. The moment you allow yourself to feel what's underneath, even briefly, the pressure often shifts, not because the problem is solved, but because the body senses honesty. And if that honesty is postponed, the signal returns, sometimes stronger, sometimes more persistent, not to punish you, but to insist. Jung believed that emotions denied conscious expression will always seek a physical outlet, and the chest is one of the first places they arrive, because that's where meaning lives, where attachment forms, where loss is felt. As awakening deepens, this sensation becomes harder to ignore, not because it's growing worse, but because your awareness is growing sharper. The body is narrowing your attention, guiding you towards something that needs space, something that wants breath, something that can no longer stay compressed. And as we move forward, the body often redirects this pressure, away from the chest, and into places where control is held more tightly. The shoulders, the neck, the jaw, and the message, once again, remains the same. Something inside you is asking to be released. Sometimes the body doesn't press. It tightens. The shoulders rise slightly, almost without you noticing. The neck feels stiff, restricted. The jaw clenches, even at rest. You're not stressed, at least, not consciously. And yet, the tension stays. This is where the body reveals something subtle. Because these are not random places. The shoulders carry responsibility. The neck connects intention to action. The jaw holds words that were never spoken. And when awakening begins, control is the first thing challenged. Not externally, internally. You may notice this tension increasing during moments when you try to stay composed. When you hold yourself together, when you choose restraint over truth, not because restraint is wrong, but because it has become automatic. The body learns patterns faster than the mind does. So it holds, it braces, it prepares, even when there is nothing to defend against. Carl Jung understood this as the somatic expression of over-identification with the ego. When identity becomes rigid, the body mirrors that rigidity. The jaw tightens to keep emotion contained. The neck stiffens to prevent movement. The shoulders lift to carry what was never meant to be carried alone. And here's the part most people overlook. This tension often increases after moments of insight, after you realize something about yourself, after you sense that a change is inevitable, because awareness threatens control. The ego tightens its grip, and the body follows. This is why stretching helps, but never fully resolves it. Why massage brings relief, but not release. Because the tension isn't muscular at its root. It's relational. A relationship to responsibility, to expectation, to self-restraint. The body holds the shape of who you believe you must be. And as awakening deepens, that shape no longer fits. So the tension becomes noticeable, persistent, unignorable, not to create pain, but to signal misalignment. Jung believed that transformation requires flexibility, psychologically and physically. And where flexibility is resisted, the body records the resistance. In the jaw that never fully relaxes, in the shoulders that never fully drop, in the neck that moves carefully, cautiously. The body is telling you where control is still dominating honesty, where strength has replaced authenticity, where endurance has replaced expression. And until that balance shifts, the tension remains. As awakening continues, the body often moves deeper still, past control, past containment, into the places where emotion and memory are stored more quietly. And that's where the next signal appears, not as tension, but as sensation, tingling, buzzing, movement along the spine. And that message feels very different. At first, it feels unfamiliar. A light tingling in the hands, a subtle buzzing in the feet, a gentle movement along the spine. Not painful, not intense, just present. You notice it most when you slow down, when you're still, when you stop distracting yourself. And that detail matters, because these sensations don't demand attention through force. They appear when the body senses space. Many people describe this as feeling energized. But that word doesn't quite capture it. It's not excitement. It's alertness, as if the body itself has become more aware. Here's where misunderstanding often begins. These sensations aren't signs of something mystical happening to you. They're signs of something reorganizing within you. Carl Jung spoke about the flow of psychic energy, how it shifts when the psyche reorganizes itself around new values, new meaning. When old patterns loosen, energy that was once bound in repression becomes mobile, and the body feels that movement. Not symbolically, literally. The nervous system adjusts. Perception sharpens. Sensations become more noticeable because less energy is spent suppressing them. This is why tingling often appears during moments of introspection, during silence, during emotional honesty. The ego relaxes its grip, just enough for sensation to surface. And while the mind may search for an explanation, the body is already responding to change. What makes this symptom unsettling isn't the sensation itself. It's the loss of familiarity. You're feeling your body without the usual filters, and that can feel strange at first. But here's the part few people recognize. These sensations often appear after tension begins to release, after the jaw softens, after the shoulders drop, after emotion is acknowledged instead of contained. The body isn't adding something new. It's restoring sensitivity. Jung believed that individuation brings a return to wholeness, and wholeness includes sensation, not numbness, not constant control, presence. So the tingling becomes a sign of reconnect ion, of awareness returning to places long ignored. And if you resist it, if you label it as weird or wrong, the body doesn't retreat. It adapts. Sometimes the sensation intensifies. Sometimes it shifts location. Sometimes it fades, only to return later. Not to confuse you, but to invite familiarity. The body is teaching you how to inhabit yourself again. Slowly, carefully, without force. And as this awareness spreads, another pattern often emerges, one that moves beyond sensation and into emotion. Sudden waves, unexpected tears, feelings that arrive without a clear story. And that message goes even deeper. Sometimes the body doesn't speak through sensation, but through emotion. Sudden tears that come without a clear story, a wave of sadness in an ordinary moment, or a quiet joy that feels deeper than the situation allows. These emotions don't ask permission. They rise when something long contained finally loosens, not because you're losing control, but because control is no longer holding everything together. This happens when the psyche releases what was postponed for survival. Feelings you didn't have time to feel. Grief you learned to carry silently. Relief that arrives late. But honestly, the body opens the door, and emotion follows. Sleep begins to change. You wake up in the middle of the night, alert for no clear reason. Dreams become vivid, symbolic, emotionally charged. Some linger long after morning comes. This isn't restlessness. It's activity. The unconscious works when the mind finally loosens its grip, sorting, integrating, revealing what couldn't surface during the day. Sleep becomes lighter because awareness is deepening. Dreams become louder because something wants recognition. The body rests, while the psyche continues its work. These symptoms aren't signs that something is wrong with you. They are signs that something true is surfacing. Awakening doesn't arrive as comfort. It arrives as honesty. And when the mind resists that honesty, the body speaks, not to punish you, but to guide you. Pain is not a failure. It's a message. If something in this video reflected your own experience, take a moment and share it in the comments, even briefly. And if you want psychology that doesn't romanticize awakening, but helps you understand it, subscribe to Hidden Mind, because becoming whole is rarely gentle, but it is always worth listening to.